afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. A little later in our program, our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to join us to discuss the conversation that she had with the organizer of a group that is trying to prevent mass detentions and deportations. And to do that, this nonprofit group held an online webinar that hosted over 600 people last night that were interested in monitoring the U.S. immigration and customs enforcement activities and expansion in U.S. communities. So we'll talk with Sandra a little bit later and hear part of their conversation that they had in regards to last night's meeting. But first, as always, we're going to take a look at what's trending across the border today, starting with congressional leaders, environmentalists, and business owners from the Big Bend area of West Texas gathered on Capitol Hill this morning to protest plans to build a border wall in that region of the state. The Trump administration initially said it planned to build a steel bollard wall in the environmentally sensitive region. Online maps with the Department of Homeland Security have changed several times, and now they show that it may be a virtual wall filled with technology. Either way, business owners like Billy Bartko and Congressman Lloyd Doggett oppose any type of wall.
We do not need a wall, and we do not need any border barriers inside the Rio Grande River. Our Big Bend sector represents 517 miles of some of the most pristine, untouched landscape in America. This includes Big Bend National Park, Big Bend Ranch State Park, and the wild and scenic lower canyons of the Rio Grande. This entire sector accounts for less than 2% of all border apprehensions.
Most West Texans just want the federal government to leave them alone. And yet the Trump regime continues to change this proposed map, what they plan to construct or destruct, all seeking to slow down the momentum of this movement.
Initial plans called for a 150-mile wall through West Texas, including Big Bend National Park and the adjoining state park. The region is made up of rugged canyons that straddle the Rio Grande. Opposition to the wall has been fierce, so much so that two nonprofits are suing U.S. Customs and Border Protection for information on border wall construction through Texas's border wall region, Big Bend region. The Center for Biological Diversity and Texas Civil Rights Project last week announced the federal lawsuit that alleges the government withheld public records on construction plans for the barriers through Big Bend National Park and Big Bend State Park, as well as the surrounding region. The lawsuit seeks to expose the federal government's plans to rip away the livelihoods of rural Texas families with a wall that no one here wants. That's what Lake and Jordahl, who we've had on this program, National Public Lands Advocate at the Center for Biological Diversity, said about the lawsuit. The Big Bend Border Patrol sector encompasses over a quarter of the nearly 2,000-mile southwest border with Mexico and is an area that draws ecotourism for its rugged natural beauty, trail hiking, and water rapids and outdoor sports. In 2024, Big Bend National Park had over 500,000 visitors and generated $57 million to the local surrounding economy. Now to the latest of an ICE detention again here in South Texas. Minu Batra came to this country nearly 35 years ago. She is a translator for the court system. The 53-year-old was arrested last month by federal immigration officers at Harlingen International Airport on her way to Milwaukee for work. She has been in ICE custody at a nearby detention center. She's been a certified court interpreter for 2 decades and is the Lone Star State's only licensed translator in 3 different Indian languages. Her parents were killed because of their religion when she was a teenager, so she came to the United States and applied for asylum. She was granted withholding of removal status.
What was your understanding of that status?
I am here, I am legal, and I will not be removed. But I have nothing to worry about. I can live and I can work, and that is all I wanted to do.
Her lawyer says her status allows her to remain in and work legally, but does not allow her to actually apply for citizenship. DHS called her an illegal alien, adding that employment authorization does not confer any type of legal status. Now we're also learning one of the doctors that we've been talking about this week from here in South Texas, Venezuelan doctors that has been detained, will be released soon. That's according to an attorney for Dr. Ezequiel Beliz, who shared that update on social media. And we've learned a Venezuelan doctor arrested at a federal checkpoint is expected to be released from ICE custody soon as well. Dr. Beliz was doing his residency here in South Texas, but his work permit renewal was halted due to the recent federal pause on visas for Venezuelans. A federal judge has extended a pause on transforming a massive Maryland warehouse into an ICE detention facility for migrants. The development comes as federal immigration officials review a plan to house tens of thousands in converted industrial buildings across the United States. The Department of Homeland Security purchased the 825,000 square foot building near Hagerstown, Maryland for more than $102 million. It plans to retrofit the giant warehouse into a facility that can hold hundreds of migrants in detention. Among 11 warehouses DHS bought nationwide, the Maryland facility was supposed to be the first one to open. The Maryland lawsuit claims the federal government didn't conduct the required environmental reviews. It said the building is in a floodplain, and the federal government did not seek public comment on its plans until more than a month after the building was purchased. Several groups raised concerns before the public comment period closed on March 5th. The following day, ICE issued a $113 million contract to renovate the building. In Scranton, Pennsylvania, the Board of Commissioners approved a new policy last night that gives county employees guidance when having to deal with federal immigration officials. The policy was passed by a narrow 2-1 vote. It does not create a new authority, but rather shows employees what to do when they are contacted by law enforcement.
There is still not enough language that really safeguards the constitutional rights, privacy rights, and really the human dignity of all of the residents in Lackawanna County.
The single no vote came from the Republican commissioner, who said he will not vote for something that stands in law enforcement's way. City leaders and police in Austin, Texas have a similar policy to the one in Pennsylvania, something we've discussed with reporters from our partners at KXAN in Austin in detail right here on Border Report Live. But now they're responding after Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton raised concerns about a recent police department policy change involving U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement administrative warrants. The Attorney General is demanding an investigation and data on APD's interaction with federal immigration agents. Jamal Kennedy has the story.
This is just absolutely political grandstanding by the Attorney General, who's in a runoff campaign.
District 7 Austin City Council member Mike Siegel's office shared this memo sent from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's office to Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis. In the memo, it states that the Attorney General is, quote, concerned that changes to Austin Police's general order regarding the handling of administrative warrants will lead to decreased cooperation between APD and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents.
The policies and the regulations of the Austin Police Department are completely compliant with state and federal law.
Last month, APD announced a new policy stating if a person had an ICE administrative warrant but no criminal charges allowing an arrest, the officer must notify a supervisor. And officers or supervisors may contact ICE to validate the warrant, but are not required to.
As a council member, I want to make sure our city is doing everything we can to make people safe and welcome in our community.
If you could share a message with City Council, what would that message be?
I understand to a degree what they're trying to say and accomplish, but there's a right way to go about it, and I think this ultimately causes more harm than it does help.
Paxton was in Georgetown on a campaign stop today, but his press team told us the AG was unavailable for an interview. His memo, however, reminded APD that Senate Bill 4 from 2017 prohibits local entities from adopting policies that, quote, prohibit or materially limit cooperation with ICE.
100%. I think it's the job of the Attorney General to make sure that local rulings are in sync with state rulings and other higher entities. So that's exactly the right thing that our AG should be doing.
The memo states the AG feels this new general order is a de facto barrier to cooperation and requested the data used to justify the policy, all data on interactions between APD and ICE in the last 2 fiscal years, and all data on interactions between APD and ICE for each of the 6 months following the effective date of the order.
Of course, we will comply and provide all of the information requested. But bigger picture, I'm very confident in the legal position of the city.
That was Jamal Kennedy reporting. The city of Houston also posted on social media this week that the state was threatening to pull funding from their city after it passed a recent ordinance tied to immigration. That's a look at what's trending across the border. Remember, you can read about these and more stories all happening along the U.S.-Mexico border 24/7 on borderreport.com. Stay with us. When we return, our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to join us, and we'll hear her conversation with one of the directors of a group that's looking to prevent mass detentions and deportations while also helping communities safely keep tabs while documenting ICE activity. We've got that ahead. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Border Report Live. As we said earlier, over 600 people last night took part in an online webinar to learn about monitoring U.S. immigrations and customs enforcement activities and expansion in U.S. communities. The nonprofit group States at the Core, or STAC, held the free webinar called ICE Out Everywhere to help communities safely keep tabs and document ICE activity. The group wants to prevent mass detentions and deportations, and STAC co-director Jill Garvey spoke with Sandra Sanchez about the plans.
So tonight's training is really a step beyond just documenting and responding to ICE in your neighborhood. It is thinking about all the other parts of the deportation machine, ICE detention centers, 287G agreements, cooperation between local police and ICE, surveillance, the sort of massive collection, aggregation of data on people in towns and cities across the country, and how that data is being turned over to DHS and ICE and being used to target people. We are focusing on community members who've probably been part of community defense networks, been a part of responding to ICE in their neighborhoods, getting them oriented to think about how they can take this new capacity, this new engagement, and really challenge some of the other pieces of this mass deportation machine.
At a time when it seems like some of the major ICE enforcement events seem to be curtailed, after what we had happened in Minnesota, right? So is this a way to kind of move in another direction? And is this also a way to maybe keep people safe, to ensure that people don't get hurt in this process?
I mean, I think there's always an element of safety to this because we know that the way enforcement is being used currently, the way federal law enforcement is being utilized in this movement is inherently unsafe for communities, not just immigrants, right? But anybody who happens to be sort of in the vicinity of this enforcement. I do think that we also are acknowledging that while we are not seeing the same surges that occurred in Chicago and Minneapolis and other cities, these sort of operations where they move hundreds or thousands of ICE and Border Patrol agents into a particular city or like a cluster of neighborhoods, enforcement is still full steam ahead. Right. So there is no real course correction from DHS on enforcement. What we're seeing is they have just switched tactically to quieter, less visible enforcement. And the 287G agreements are proliferating across the country, and they are sort of the backbone of that quiet enforcement. I think it's doing an immense amount of harm to cities and communities, and most people aren't aware of it. And those 287G agreements are really entrenched. It is really hard to break those 287G agreements. It is really hard to hold your local police accountable to not cooperating with ICE. So It's hard work. It's going to take some sustained energy from community activists to really make a dent in this. But I think also shine a light on what harm is being done to communities that doesn't look exactly like Twin Cities, right? It doesn't look like the tear gas being thrown or people being, shot for documenting ICE. But it is really harmful, and it is ripping neighborhoods apart, and it is tearing apart families. States at the Core works with people all over the country, and our small little crew of organizers are spread out around the country. So we will we travel around. We go basically wherever someone says they need help. So if someone calls us from Nebraska or North Carolina, any country or any state in the US that we have a group of activists or organizers who say they are facing a challenge from authoritarianism, we try to help.
I'm based on the border in McAllen. It's interesting to hear people in the interior of the country, Chicago, Minneapolis, interested in this subject. So you're educating people on basically something that we here in the border have been living with for almost a decade. Since the surges began in 2014, enforcement activities have begun. I mean, were you aware of what was going on? What is it like to educate people or just kind of having their eyes open now? And what are their responses?
Yeah, I think, I do think the tactics and the presence of Border Patrol in sort of the interior, right, has been a real shock. I think people in Chicago and other cities are really understanding what it's like now to live with essentially an oppressive police force that operates with very little accountability. So in that sense, I think myself included, a lot of people have sort of opened their eyes to what people in border communities have been experiencing for a very long time. I also think that there is something that has happened that is actually rooted in a lot of communities, right? Rooted in Black liberation movements, rooted in the American Indian movement, but also that I think has been tried by border communities for a long time, which is the sort of power of documentation. There are places where these abuses have been happening for a long time, but they haven't been documented. And it is true that there are places in the US that it is much riskier. Conditions are much harder to do that kind of documentation. So we saw a lot of brave people in Minneapolis coming out and documenting what was happening. And that was amazing to see. They also had sort of a set of conditions there, right? That even though it was still very dangerous, they had local elected leaders sort of engaging in this. They had good communications coming from their mayor and their governor, right? Encouraging people to exercise their First Amendment rights that, frankly, a lot of communities and states don't have. So even other states where you wouldn't necessarily see Border Patrol, like Tennessee, they have halo laws on the books that mean that they have to be at least 25 feet away from a law enforcement officer or agent to be documenting them. Those are sort of the smaller things, and they add up. And I think border communities are especially challenging places. And this is going to be a little bit of the frontier for this work to sort of hold accountable and hold at bay authoritarian advances, is if this organizing and this sort of this documentation and responsiveness can work in those environments.
And this is the first time you've ever opened it up to the entire country.
Yeah, we haven't done this training. So we do a lot of ICE Watch training, or what we call documenting and responding to ICE. So we've trained about 40,000 people in ICE Watch. we're obviously part of a vast network and fabric of trainers on this front, right? So by our estimate, hundreds of thousands of people have gone through Ice Watch training in the last year. And then we do something called what we call Beyond Ice Watch, but it's really a building for community defense training. And that is to really get down into how do you build a sustained network of hyperlocal people who are engaged on this community defense work. It's hard. It's hard work. It's harder than people think. And yet, hundreds of these groups that are essentially mostly volunteer run. Some involve community organizations or paid organizers, but overwhelmingly they're run just by kind of regular, normal people with normal, non-political jobs, right? So we really want to give people the tools to keep these community defense networks together, keep them growing, and particularly find goals that are both like practical and applicable to their community, but also are ambitious, right? That are sort of collectively contributing to something that we think will save our democracy. What are the other pieces of this puzzle that we need to take on? So I think a big piece of this is the detention expansion, getting people oriented to this incredible push to expand incarceration of immigrants.
Welcome back. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez joining me live now here in the Stream Center in Harlingen, Texas. Sandra, we're kind of short on time, but I did want to ask, you watched this meeting happen in real time. What were some of your takeaways from it?
Yeah, as you heard Jill Garvey of States of the Core say, it's the little things that add up, and that's exactly what they were pushing to the 600 people who were watching. They've already trained 42,000 people nationwide, and it was really interesting because they gave them tips for their independent communities for everyone to kind of dig in. They said that from the 287G agreements to back the sheriff's candidates that have like-minded positions. Theirs is obviously to oppose these agreements with law enforcement officials that allow them to also perform immigration policing duties. They said submit FOIA information to get data. And then for these detention facilities, I thought it was really interesting. They said, take apart every piece, question everything having to do with it, whether it be how much sewage it will tax on a community, how much water infrastructure, electricity needs, and then push back at city council, go to your lawmakers and say, this 10,000 person facility is going to take up so much water, and or like that example you gave at the top of the show, it's in a floodplain. We didn't have a public hearing about it. They just kept saying, question everything, and then maybe something will hit. It was very creative. It was all about nonviolent, non-confrontational, non-physical challenging of this. So very different idea. They're not telling people to follow ICE agents or anything like that. They're saying use legal resources on policy to question what's happening in your neighborhoods and put authoritative figures to task and make them work for you. They gave examples of calling out companies that would profit from this. Apparently this happened in Virginia with a Canadian company, and people started boycotting the product. The Canadian company pulled the lease on DHS for the detention facility and said, we don't want this to affect our bottom line.
Yeah, one interesting thing I caught from your conversation with her, too, is that she made a pretty clear point there that, these people aren't paid, protesters. Right. She was speaking to volunteers, which is something that we've heard the administration really, really kind of hammer like, oh, these are paid protesters. These aren't real people. Was there anything like that in the meeting, kind of reminding folks?
Yeah, no, absolutely. They were like, well, we're cognizant that you all need to get dinner on the table and put your kids to bed. And this is a hard summer that you're going to have of work ahead. But this is civil work. This is, if you believe in this cause, then you do this. And so I did find it was very motivating, and they were very honest, and I thought it was very interesting, just the different tactics, the different ways that they basically told people, if you don't like something, question it with your government officials and see what happens.
Yeah, very similar to how we do business here in the field of journalism.
It was.
Using the data, the government resources, and everything to shine a light on something that may or may not be an injustice.
And they have 2 upcoming additional trainings, and links to that are on our borderreport.com website.
Right. Thank you so much, Sandra. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you for watching. We'll see you next time.